let's get started with tonight's event, our panelists. So we're talking about how to repair your car on a Tuesday. No, totally kidding. We're here to talk about UX research repositories. And we have a panel of fantastic UX pros. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to be in a forum here. And my first question to the group, I'd like to just do a quick round robin with everyone. Tell us, and these are for our panelists, not everybody here. These are for our 4 panelists, so don't get excited. I'd like you to say your name, your title, where you work, and maybe a little fun fact about you. So I'm going to start with Lorie, because I know her and I know she'll answer me. So Lorie, get us started.
All right. So welcome, everybody. I'm Lorie Whitaker. I am a staff UX researcher at Okta. So Jared and I actually work together. And I don't know, I'm not really fun, but I'm one of the co-founders of the group. I used to work with Jen over at Capital One and Rackspace. I could work with you one day, who knows? I get around. And I live in Texas, so that's just about me. I'm going to pass it to Jared.
Thanks, Lorie. So I'm Jared Forney. I'm a staff UX researcher at Okta. And let's see, interesting fact. Well, okay, here's a former life fact. So before I got into design and a researcher, I was kind of on a pre-law track. So I worked for the US Attorney's Office in DC for a while. Got to do a lot of cool things, but one of the wildest things I ever got to do was handle the original John Hinckley case files. So like all the stuff prior to him attempting to assassinate Reagan, that was a pretty wild. I worked with the attorney who handled that case, so that was a pretty interesting piece of history that I got to handle on a regular basis. So that's a weird fact about me. So I think I'll go ahead and pass it over to Eric.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Eric, based in New York. Currently a researcher at Instagram, but previously I worked at a company called Thumbtack where I built our research archive. So I'll be speaking mostly about that. I think my shirt is pretty fun tonight. It's creating like a psychedelic pattern whenever I move around. So I kind of like that. I feel like I need to wear this more for Zoom calls. Other fun things. I'm really obsessed with improv theater. So if there's anyone who likes that, you should let me know where to go in New York, because I just moved here. I know there's plenty, but I need curation. Like there are too many options, and someone needs to tell me where the best stuff is. But yeah, excited to be learning from the panelists tonight, and I'll pass it over to Matt, the last one.
Hello there. Can you hear me okay? Cool.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Matt Duignan. I'm a principal UX research manager at Microsoft, but really I'm acting as a product manager for the Human Insights Tracking System, which is a platform that we've been building for the last 6 years to hold all of the UX research market insights and data science insights at Microsoft. Fun fact, somewhat fun fact, my PhD was looking at the UX or the user interfaces of computer music production software and looking at the abstractions and the mismatches between music producers' mental models and music software. And there are some pretty kind of fun crossovers and parallels between sort of trying to deconstruct and create platforms for modeling user research knowledge and modeling music, and kind of allowing you to manipulate things. So there you go. I think that's it.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. And I'm going to stop. I'm going to start with a little, I'm not going to start with the tools, which is why I know everybody's here. What repository tool should I do or should I use? I know that's why you're here, and I'm not going to start that way. That's how I'm going to roll. I want to talk about some things to consider when you're thinking about a repository. So I want to talk about, like, what is your company, what are you sharing in a repository? What kind of information is actually in there? Maybe what are some of the formats, just like what's in your repository? Jared, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I think, fundamentally, I think where we started, and we've, just for a little bit of historical reference for our repository, we've been running for about 2 years now in its current format. And I think really where it started with us fundamentally was the artifacts, the ultimate kind of final end results of research. So it started with kind of your fundamentals, the summaries, reports, any kind of presentation materials, highlight reels, things of that nature, what are ultimately living in our repository. And I think more and more, what I could see us storing more in the future is more of the raw data, right? Not just the transcripts and recordings of the sessions that we conduct, but even other little artifacts from, say, participatory design sessions or workshops, or things that are, perhaps a little bit more loosely structured data than what I feel like folks often start with. So at a high level, that's kind of what we store and kind of what we're looking to add into a repo as we go.
All right. Anyone else on our panel feel like they'd like to answer that? Like, what kind of nuggets are in your repository?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. One way that I view it is there's different layers, as Jared was kind of alluding to, that you can have in a repository, and a lot of tools out there focus on that raw data layer and how to extract insights from that into reportish type things. So some of the third-party commercial tools really help you with that layer. Whereas what we've been really focused on at Microsoft is the layer above of, like, it's actually a finished artifact, as Jared was saying, and how do you share those around the company? But even more so, we're trying to figure out the layer above that, which is, what are you learning across all of those studies? What are those key recurring themes and insights? And so that we're kind of really focused on those upper layers because we know, at least at Microsoft, there's a ton of divergence in the particular practices at those lower layers, team by team, since we're a pretty big organization.
Yeah, Matt. So a follow-up to that, kind of how are you sharing it? How are you tying those threads for those that need the threads tied, but also how are you not for somebody who just needs something very specific?
Do you mean between those sort of upper layers or down to the bottom layers of data?
Well, in between studies or in between data points. I mean, I'm assuming that if someone typed in search, they're going to get a lot of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing we were doing is, it wasn't inspired by this, but it was sort of in parallel, this idea of the atomic insights or research nuggets that Toman and others have talked about. We have some of the same ideas in our system around, like, for a study report, it really does often consist of a set of key insights within it. And so our system does treat those in a database as individual insights. And what we're trying to do, particularly as we're hiring data scientists and such, is to try and figure out how to find links and relationships with other similar insights in other studies, because there's sort of this like needle in the haystack problem where there's a lot of usability insights, but there's one or two of them that are really, you want to remember, or they relate to other insights. And so in our platform, you can kind of connect them just with hyperlinks, but we retain those backlinks. And then likewise, as you're producing these higher level insights, you want the same sort of relationships and linkages. And then that has to flow through kind of the search experience and, the ability to kind of easily get a link to any insight in the system. I could go on and on about atomic insights and some of the trade-offs and things to avoid there as well, but that's probably enough for now.
I think I want to revisit that because I think that's really valuable. Anybody else want to talk about kind of how you're sharing the information with your company? And I think there's kind of two levels, right? There's what you want to share with your research team that really kind of want all the details, all the raw data, and then what you want to share with people who are just trying to find the high levels or the quick nuggets, right? So how do you distinguish between those, if you do?
Yeah, and I think that's the deeper conversation that Matt was pointing to, because it is a different topic to get into that. What I experienced when I was at GitLab, and that's what I'll be talking about tonight, since Jared and I work together, he can take Okta. We use Dovetail, and we actually use GitLab first to build our own repository. And What I've seen is that there's a progression, just like there is in UX maturity, there's a progression of maturity in using these repositories. Because it first starts out with, we just need a place to put all of our stuff. Just give me a place to put it, which was GitLab. And then you start to think, but how do we get it back out? We have it in there now. We've painstakingly hand forged all of these insights and all of these video clips. What are we going to do with it? And that's when the librarian in me comes out and starts to talk about taxonomy and cataloging and trying to get the organization to think very intentionally about doing some of those activities. Because if you don't have intention behind it, it will become as messy as just give me a place to store all my stuff, because you will have 15 different tags for one product. And no matter who goes in there to search, they'll always be missing something because of the tagging and those category systems. So it's very, very difficult. And it's even more difficult when we got to the point at GitLab where we were encouraging our customer success, our account managers, to put their customer conversations into Dovetail 2. We had a little template for them to use. And that's just introducing a whole nother set of data that you have even less control over. And it just got really messy really quick. And if you don't have a good steward of the system and the taxonomy, it's a very, very difficult thing to wrangle.
Great. My next question, who is in charge of your repository? Anyone want to take that? Jerry?
I can pick it up. Sure. So I would say, I think overall, it's kind of with the way this is something that is, I think, starting to shift within our organization, is a need for more concentrated research operations. Day to day, I'm kind of managing the repository in its current form, but I would say a lot of the ongoing upkeep and management is kind of loosely distributed across our team as well. You know, everybody's kind of responsible for keeping hygiene as much as possible when it comes to product organization and some of the taxonomy that we assign. But as Lorie kind of alluded to, like, it's very much a full-time job. It's something that really does take a lot of energy and focus to do well. And I think to the extent that you can build good habits around things like your taxonomy, like your governance strategies, and the educational and socialization aspects of your repository as well, all feeds into kind of that day-to-day management of the repository itself. So whether that falls on an individual or a team or a selection of people, I think that's really fundamental to it being successful.
All right. How about you, Matt? Who owns the repository?
In my case, I guess technically me, although riffing off Jared and Lorie both, I would say the key is to have people with a library and information sciences background who are in key points, influencing the kind of controls around what's coming in and its quality and its appropriateness of tagging. So for example, just making sure that every document that comes in is appropriately tagged and not just kind of crowdsourcing it or hope it's going to work for the best, because I think you do just end up with a kind of messy pile if you don't take that approach.
All right, thanks. So Eric, I have a question for you. How do you structure the information? Is it by team, by project, by date, product, something else? What's worked well, and maybe what lessons have you learned along the way about how you structure your repository and the information?
Yeah, so the archive we built at Thumbtack, first of all, Thumbtack is not Microsoft, right? Like Thumbtack has like 300-400 people probably right now and 7 researchers. So when we started out, we did actually, like as researchers, we totally geeked out on Atomic Insights and we're like, oh my God, this is so cool. We listened to Thomas Sharon's like podcast, whatever, like, oh, we have to try this. And then we very quickly realized that like, we don't even have a common definition amongst the four of us at the time, of what a nugget is or what an insight is, and we don't have a taxonomy, and like, who's going to do this? We're all really busy. And then we realized, okay, let's just create a place where all our reports go. So that's what we ended up doing. So like the unit of that is being stored is a project, and attached to that is, you know, the final output and like a summary of findings, etc. And we don't have too much of a taxonomy, to be honest. Like we do have tagging, but we are not doing it in a very structured way. It is crowdsourced, so it's not very reliable. And we have like basic metadata, like the quarter it was made, who was participating. So Thumbtack has like two main types of users: professionals who sell their services, customers who buy the services. So like we would add that so you could like filter easily. But what we really focused on was making sure that it was searchable. So like the person who put it in didn't have to think too much about, am I selecting the right tags in this field? Am I putting in the right thing here? As long as the main information about what the study was about was in the summary, it would be searchable. And we found that that is often how people ended up using it too. Like they wouldn't really use the filters that we built or the scrolling through the columns. They would just like ask their question essentially in the search bar and hope to find what they needed. Oh, I think you're muted, Jen.
Yes, I was. Thank you. So it sounds like it's kind of loose, not super structured, and you're relying a bit more on searching.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Just like they do with us, right? Hey, do you know if anything, do you have any research on this? And what do you know about this? Right? It's still that same kind of, let me just ask Google the question, what time is it in Australia right now? And it'll tell me the answer. I don't have to think about tags or how somebody structured that data. But unfortunately, the tools are not there yet.
Would you say that's the case for you? You, Eric, is like they do a search and maybe come to you because they still can't find it, or are they pretty self-reliant?
So it's actually, I was thinking about this too. I think, again, when we started off with this idea, we were hoping that we would like be able to like avoid, you know, a PM ping in the researcher, hey, what do we know about payments, or what do we know about trust? And then that researcher had to like spend hours finding that and reporting back. And we're like, oh, you can just go to our archive and find it yourself. Turns out, no, because people, I mean, maybe they just don't have time. They don't actually know what to look for. Even like, you know, there might be like a little bit of like translation. Maybe a study was about one feature that now is called something else, and this PM is new, so they don't know that. So what we often found is that the main users of the archive was actually the researchers ourselves. So instead of spending a lot of time digging up the old stuff to answer that very pointed, good, relevant question, we could go to the archive, and because we had built it and we were familiar with it and it was well organized, we would much quicker just find our own work. Like I remember stopping to use Google Drive and I just used the archive to find my own reports because it was faster to just use that interface.
Yeah, just to add off of what Eric said, I think another thing that we've noticed through the use of our repository, in addition to it being easier for like Eric said, to find our own work, which was a problem we definitely had before. I think the other thing, by encouraging people to search it, while they may not always find the answers that they're looking for, what I've started to notice too is it's resulting in people coming to us with better questions. A lot of times, you know, you get that initial, everybody's kind of had that shoot from the hip, like research question, like, hey, I have this like assumption that I want to validate, and I want to come to the research team to figure it out. And I think by kind of introducing the idea of like, well, we have like a huge body of knowledge of all sorts of topics. And while it may not answer every question you have automatically, what it can do is perhaps inspire a little bit more focused thinking, or potentially open some doors to some new questions that you hadn't even considered. And when it comes time to plan research, you know, we found like PMs and designers and people who use our repository are coming to us with a lot more focused ways of thinking that I think ultimately results in better research getting put into the repository, you know, going forward.
Interesting. Jared, I have a quick follow-up with that. Have you ever had these questions influence a potential research project, the questions that they asked you?
You mean in terms of like what ultimately gets planned?
Yeah, like, oh, that's a good question. Maybe we should do some research on that because we don't have any research yet. What's your experience around something like that?
Yeah, I think that's something that we have noticed come into like we've had. I think there's two kind of ways that we've approached that. One, we have had people come to us with questions. I think that have, if not outright created new studies, at least influence like, oh, that is something we should maybe at least put on our roadmap or consider for future work if we don't address it in that moment. I think the other thing that, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, you know, at a higher level for repositories, is we've been able to kind of uncover broad thematic, kind of almost secondary meta research of our own body of work, right? It's like, oh, okay, we're looking at the last 3 years of our work and we're seeing the same pattern come up again and again that maybe internally amongst our team we've talked about, but we never really like, oh, I remember that one conversation from like 6 months ago that we had with this customer. Oh, my customer said the same thing. Like being able to actually consolidate that and then up level it, saying, look, here's this thematic thing. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's all the little nuggets that we've pulled from various unrelated conversations that have all wound up talking about the same thing. So I think that's also where new research is starting to come from. Less reactive, more proactive.
All right, great. So I'm going to move on and I'm going to talk about tools because everybody wants to know about tools. So my first question is, what do you look for when you're looking for or building out a repository tool? Matt, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I could maybe represent the, you know, build it yourself group or approach. I would say that it is a deceptively, I mean, there are some good platforms that you can build upon, but anyone who's thinking of building their own platform for doing this, it is a deceptively deep problem to solve for. I think on the surface, it can seem simple, but if you're doing anything beyond the basics of like, oh, we're attaching a research document. If you want to build your own atomic insight system, I guess, not that that's exactly what we've done, but it is a very big undertaking. So I wouldn't suggest that unless you are kind of considering, you know, putting multiple developers and PMs and all the other things you need for other repository like librarians and other things on it for, you know, many years. So I'll leave it at that, given that's kind of our experience. And I think it's returning really good dividends for us, but it is a very big undertaking.
Okay. Eric, how about your thoughts? What were you looking for in a repository tool?
Yeah, I think the main thing for us was we needed a relational database, and like someone who is not a computer science major, not a librarian, like I didn't even know what that meant when I first was introduced to the concept. But I've had to learn. So essentially, it allows the database works this way. Like every project is just one row in some source of truth somewhere, and then it has all this like all the columns that are attached to it, and then you can sort or organize the database by those columns or those features. So for example, if I added project 1, it was done in quarter 2, and then I add project 2, who was also done in quarter 2, and then I add project 3, who was done in quarter 4. And then I can have another view that only shows the projects from quarter 1 and only shows the projects from quarter 4, for example. And that is only possible in a relational database unless you want to like deal with like, you know, if you have a spreadsheet, for example, you can accomplish that by just filtering the whole table. But that becomes really complicated if you want multiple people to use the database or if you want multiple different permutations of those filters. So that was the most important thing. And that's why we chose Coda, which is the tool that we've used, is because they were essentially, that company was essentially founded on the idea that we need to make relational databases easier to use and allow people to build applications, or like that's essentially what we did, right? Like on top of it. So it was a very good fit between our need and what the product was meant to do.
And how's that been working out?
So, I mean, I left Thumbtack about a year ago, so I don't know exactly how it's being used, but so I can mainly speak about like my experience being the person who built the tool and had to work, or built the repository, had to work in the tool and had to work with Coda, the team that built that tool. It was amazing because the Coda team at the time, I'm sure they're still operating this way, were insanely responsive to my feedback and my concerns. So I remember like multiple times asking for something, and then a few weeks later, my like account manager would like message me and say like, hey, we included that feature in the most recent launch. So for example, one thing that was important for us was to be able to have one set of users, the researchers themselves. We wanted to have access to a version of the archive that they can edit so that they can easily add their own work, they can update work, they can fix errors, etc. But then for people who weren't researchers, we did not want them to do that. So for example, if you imagine if we had just used a spreadsheet on Google, there's no setting, like there is like a view only setting, but then you can't filter it. There's a comment setting, etc. And then there's an edit setting. And if you have the edit setting, then people can mess things up. But what we were able to do with Coda is have essentially a public view of the archive that people can still filter, they can search through, they can organize the data in different ways, but their actions aren't saved. So it's only saved for that user in that session. And when they find what they need, they leave, and the database itself remains unchanged.
Great, thank you. Lorie, popping over to you. I know you have experience with a few different repository systems. So why don't you talk about some of the differences and the pros and cons of some of you've dealt with in the past and present?
Yeah, I was going to say, so when I joined GitLab, they were using GitLab as a repo for the research. GitLab is not a research repo. GitLab is a code repo. It was fine when there was a team of 2 researchers, but as the team grew, it could not scale with what we needed to share across the company as the company grew. So then we went to Dovetail. Dovetail is a very small company. They're out of Australia, which is where their support is. Go Australia, but if you need something in American time zones, you're going to wait till tomorrow to get an answer. So be aware of that. My biggest advice is to be honest with yourself at your team size and your team bandwidth to support working with a tool. If you are a team of 1, if you can get them to pay for something, great, but do you have the time to be on the phone or on chat support with that team who is making that tool for you versus doing the job that your company hired you to do? Everybody has to make that decision for themselves. We needed more support than I think my organization understood that we needed with Dovetail. It's not a bad product. It's just we didn't have the luxury of who we have now, Jared, to have somebody who was the main point of contact for that tool to help us set it up, to help us understand all the nuances, to get the templates going. And so it was a very crowdsourced thing. And this very English word, but like higgledy-piggledy. It was just kind of like Frankensteined together on our end because we couldn't give the time to it. So that would be my advice, is to really be honest with yourself and your team structure and your company structure and the support that you may have or don't have when you're really looking at these tools, because there is no magic tool out there. There's no one tool. Now, maybe the Microsoft one, the mascot, I'm very curious about that. But there's no one tool that you can actually buy out there that will solve all these problems for you. There is not, no matter what those salespeople tell you, it will not. There are a myriad of things you have to do to solve the problems. And then even then, I don't know if anybody's got it down.
Okay. So you mentioned GitLab, you mentioned Dovetail. Any thoughts on any other repositories that you have experience with?
Those are the 2 big ones. I mean, I've used spreadsheets, not ideal, as Eric mentioned. I've fiddled around with Airtable a little bit, but still it's got limitations to it as well. Because
talk about that a little bit. Because
it's not.
I know companies who are using Airtable. Yeah. I don't know if anybody's in the chats mentioned Airtable, but can you go into pros and cons of that a little bit?
Well, like there's no, Dovetail has transcription service. So you can upload a video and it will transcribe it and you get the transcription. So if your PM doesn't want to watch a video, they can just simply read it, or you can search the transcription for the clip that you're looking at. Airtable is just a repository of data. So you're going to have to do that somewhere else. And you can. It's just another step in another tool that you have to support to pull that information back into the Airtable structure. So again, it's that balance of what do I need? What can I support? What can I work with? How much time do I have to deal with it all?
Yeah, that's a fair question. Jared, how about your experience, pros and cons of tools that you've worked with presently or in the past?
Totally. So this is the part where I take my researcher hat and I push it over to the side, and I also put my procurement hat on, because this was definitely when I selected our repository tool a little over 2.5 years ago. I went through this whole process, right? I did POCs for about half a dozen tools. I did a POC with Airtable for us just to prove out the idea and see where the wrinkles were. And I remember I did at the time, I demoed Dovetail, Aurelius, and ultimately what we went with was EnjoyHQ. And really, when I was thinking about this process, I kind of looked at it from through 5 different lenses. Was kind of really I built out in a kind of an internal rubric for myself to think about how I was going to evaluate these tools. And I use kind of the same lenses to evaluate any tool, but it was particularly important when looking at a repository. And the first one really came down to, for me, especially when we were thinking starting small with a ton of data, the first thing was portability. If this doesn't work out, or if we need to migrate, and that's data portability in and out, right? Like, how am I going to get 3 years worth of work, 3 to 4 years worth of work into this tool? What does that process look like? And so, speaking for our organization particularly, we tried some other tools and found that the import experience wasn't too great, or it didn't really render in a way that didn't involve a lot of massaging to get it to a usable state. So, data portability in and out was a big one. The kind of integrations that the tool offers, like being able to have it talk to other tools in our stack, either now or in the future. It's something that we're thinking a lot about, especially lately as our team grows and we start to scale. Like, having multiple tools be able to call back and into that repository without us having to do a lot of manual transfer is a big part of it. On the topic of scalability, that's the other thing, is as interest in this tool has grown, everybody's finding out, oh, there's all this great resources and information in here, and I can get in there and dig around. Governance is a huge thing. Like, really being able to make sure you have the proper controls in place so that the right people get access when they're supposed to get it. And ideally, that kind of idea of least privilege access, so only what they need and no more. That's something that I feel like a lot of these tools still need to kind of refine a little bit, but we've found strategies over time, and coupled with education, to give people that kind of proper level of access so they can be real contributors and collaborators in that respect. I think compliance obviously is a huge one. That, none of these tools get through, at least from Okta. I'm sure this is all companies, but Okta especially, they don't make it through the front door without SOC 2, right? Like, if they don't have SOC 2 compliance, they don't have, SAML integrations where they can, securely provide a connection to, our company and its set of tools, it's not going to make it past the cutting room floor. But also, this extends to, of course, our participants, right? Like, things like GDPR compliance and CCPA are a huge, huge part of this. And, being able to respond to those requests in an effective way is something that's really, really important. And then, of course, like I mentioned it last, but of course, ease of use is super important. That's how easy is the tool to navigate and use, but also, what's the documentation like? What's the support look like? How is the onboarding experience, and how is your vendor relationship? Those are all things when you're considering a tool. The way I often tell people is it's not you're not searching for a life partner, you're looking for a bus route. And you're really just trying to find what's the tool that's going to get you closest to where you want to go. You're still going to have to walk probably the last few blocks, because all tools are, but like, what's really going to get you closest is really like what I look through when I think of all those things in totality.
Great, thanks, Jared. One more follow-up question for you. You mentioned EnjoyHQ, and I'm noticing a lot of mentions in the chat of that tool specifically. Could you talk really briefly, talk about the pros and cons of that tool specifically?
Sure. I have to put a huge caveat up front.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I've worked with Sophia very closely over the last 2 years. I've done some speaking engagements with her at UXRC.
Who's Sophia?
Sophia Quintaro, I'm sorry, the co-founder of EnjoyHQ.
Oh, okay.
And they've since recently been acquired by UserZoom as well. We're not currently UserZoom customers except indirectly through EnjoyHQ, but I have to put that disclaimer up front that I've worked with the co-founder closely. That being said, even prior to that, I think the thing that stood out when we procured the tool originally was how responsive they were to feature development. They're a small team as well, like Coda, and they were definitely willing to build and iterate and take feedback, like all good research tools should. I think really what stood out to us in the early days was the support for single sign-on and security was something that they had out of the gate. Their transcription features were especially good. I think how the searching and indexing of information was particularly powerful. They started with that. So while it was very taxonomy forward, they really thought about the underlying search, which drives a lot of those core interactions. If I could say there were a few soft spots, I'd say some of the higher level linkages, like kind of like what Matt was talking about, what they're doing with their platform of being able to really up level beyond the reports and summaries and connect those higher level themes together. I think that's still kind of a work in progress for them. They have the tooling in place. I think it's just kind of making those semantic connections is still a little challenging. And of course, as a result of an acquisition, there's always questions. But from what I've seen so far, they've handled it well. And I think, they're still continuing to build and develop new features.
Okay, thanks for that. So I've seen some mention in the chat of some kind of wiki style tools like Condense or Confluence, kind of those kind of platforms. Does anyone have any experience examining those kind of platforms? And maybe have you used one, or maybe why you did not do that kind of repository format? Anybody have any thoughts on that from our panel?
We did start at Microsoft in the large research group we were at and using a wiki to store more of our kind of reusable, durable knowledge. And it was actually the limitations of that led us to really wanting to kind of identify specific insights within that content and be able to link and network and create that kind of graph of interconnected evidence within that you'll most likely be missing from at least the basic wiki solutions. And you get more of if you move to, the EnjoyHQ or the Australian one, Dovetail, those types of solutions give you more of that like research structure that I think is actually quite valuable from my experience.
Okay. Anyone else really thinking about those kind of platforms and maybe didn't go with it for any particular reason? No? Eric? No?
I can speak a little bit just really quickly we did look at Confluence for a hot minute. I think how successful something like that in my limited experience has been is how well your Confluence is organized to begin with, and kind of what your company culture is around it. My experience is you're more likely to find the lunch menu than you are to be able to find what you're looking for sometimes. So we did have some research data in there before we decided we needed a separate place for it. But we just found like that was kind of a challenge. So that's why we ultimately didn't go that route. Doesn't mean it doesn't work for others, but that's speaking personally.
Yeah. Great, thanks for that. So there's been a few mentions. I know that Eric mentioned it, and Matt, about Tomer's atomic insights. And I think that there might be some who are not familiar with that concept or, what that means. So would one of you like to explain what atomic insights, atomic level is for newbies, like who don't know?
Yeah, I'll take a crack. I think the key idea or the simplest version of it is that, well, there's different ways to formulate it maybe, but that each of the things you know would be a unique research nugget, and that those could sit in a database. I guess fundamentally it's the idea of treating the things that you're learning as database entries rather than kind of more of a report mindset. I will say from the stuff I've read of theirs, when they talk about insights, they're not always, when I think about insights, I think about it more of a statement of fact, like a claim or a thing, like, hey, parents feel a certain way about family safety on the internet. Like, there'd be actually a way you'd phrase it that's like, oh, that's an insight. But sometimes it's a bit more like, oh, it's just a chunk of stuff we know. But it's really that idea of these units of knowledge. And if I bridge a little bit into, kind of a critique of it and how it's done better or worse, I guess. Yeah. So I think the key thing, and I think it's fundamental to the whole idea of a research repository, is you have to be thinking about when it's being authored, it is being authored in a context for a purpose, usually for a specific set of stakeholders in a given moment. And part of the point of a repository is, though, to create content that people will come back to in a different context at a different point in time and be able to consume that. I think the simplistic version of research atomic nuggets is that they're just these like factoids that you kind of create and put into a database, thinking that people will come back and consume them and they'll be useful in the future at some future point within your kind of topic, or maybe to another team that's adjacent. And I guess what we really found is that just sort of is very challenging and difficult in practice, as I think Eric was sort of alluding to, is that all of your researchers are super busy, you're doing work principally for immediate stakeholders, and it's very hard to find the motivation to go off and kind of create these isolated research nuggets that are kind of independent and putting them into a database with the hope that one day someone might contribute to it. And then the other question I have is it really the best consumption experience for your stakeholders or your future researchers who'll be coming back in to kind of consume these isolated floating kind of nuggets in a database? Or to the family safety example, wouldn't they prefer to come and consume a well kind of polished, curated piece of content with a set of things that are known about a topic or an area, like family safety? Like, what do we know about parents on the internet and keeping their kids safe? It's like, it's not just going to be one nugget. It's going to be like almost like a document or a set of like a website where you go and like, here are the things we know and here's how to think about it. Here's the supporting evidence. So I guess that sort of works into our approach, which in the time since we started, we've seen kind of the, EnjoyHQ and Dovetail and other platforms that have some of this nuance of like documents that have insight structure within them or represented within them in some fashion, or even Notion and Coda, kind of like a database within a document type structure. And I guess the other thing to think about there is that we're working on, and I guess the other vendors are probably thinking about, is how to support sort of this just-in-time curation activity, which is, if you don't really have time to go off and like author these, like, here's everything we know about topic X, how do you make it easy for people to contribute to such a body of knowledge on the fly? And I think that's the really tricky and tough part, and what we're focused on. But yeah, I'd be interested to see what the other people think, if that mirrors your own sort of view on it, or if you would like to disagree, I'd be interested as well.
No, I can jump in. So like, I think for us, like, the main reason why we didn't go with like an atomic insights or like kind of like nugget level storage was because, yeah, no one had time to do that. And it was like, it felt like we were designing for a maybe valuable thing that potentially could be realized in the future, but we had so many immediate needs that could be solved better with a different tool. As I've reflected more on this though, I actually think the premise of storing and combining nuggets may be faulty, because the reality is that like observations, specifically if they're qualitative research, are dependent and influenced by the context in which they're collected. So if I have an observation that says people really don't want hot dogs at night, that's going to matter. Like, who said that? When did they say that? How are they feeling? How did I ask the question? Was it presented next to pizza as an option or next to vegetables, right? Like, and all that context easily gets lost when you just store and try to combine these nuggets. So I actually think that sometimes we might be doing ourselves a disservice if the goal is to actually generate knowledge by trying to think that we can do these shortcuts by like storing the data at this level. I of course don't have any proof to suggest that that's going to happen. It's just like something that I worry about. And it's also related to someone in the comments asked a great question before, which is like, isn't it a problem that your stakeholders aren't using the repository themselves? And like, how can you get them to use it more? And I actually don't think that's a problem. Like, I'm actually fine with the PM or designer asking the question, the researcher spending a little bit of time finding the answer, and then communicating that in a conversation or a document, because the researcher is going to be equipped with skills and experience to interpret the data points from these different studies in a way that someone from another function necessarily isn't. So a lot of people are, but not everyone.
One thing I just
Yeah.
didn't. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to back up what Eric said about the atomic nugget piece. I think, well, I'm pretty sure I know that this is the genesis of the tag issue, because you're trying to tag the shit out of an insight so you can find it enough times to make it worthwhile or pull the context through these tags. And you've got 35 tags on one sentence. You've lost the thread at that point, because even if you're going in and searching for hot dogs and you've got a tag on that one insight that's hot dog, you have no idea where it's come from. You have no idea who you talked to or what the question even was or what the task was at hand. You just have, they don't like to eat hot dogs at night. And it's the tools are trying to solve that by giving you the categories and the taxonomy, but I don't think that that's really how that's going to be solved. I'm not quite sure how that's going to be solved. I think that Tomer had a good direction to try to break these monolithic 89-page reports apart into digestible pieces. But I also see that it's been taken way to the extreme, which is something we tried at GitLab and it didn't really work, to really get the nugget down to a sentence. That's all you put into the repo at one point was a sentence. And I was like, well, about what? What am I supposed to write? Can I write 2 sentences? No, 1 sentence. And it's just not usable at that level.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I will say I do believe that, though, that there are insights within your reports, and there is a way to bring this together where if you can have, like, here is a piece of work done in a particular context, here's all the content around it that is going to be consumed in a moment by a group. But you do want it to be more searchable, findable, linkable, referenceable to the things within it that you learned. You want to be really careful how those might be pulled out, but do not start with the assumption that you can just like break everything into pieces and just have a database of those pieces. Like, the starting point has to be that unit, and that's true whether it's a study report for a particular moment, or if it's the higher level knowledge that we're working on curating in our platform, it's the same again. So I definitely agree with what I'm hearing, but I think there is a way to bring it together to as long as you retain that context and think of the vessel of that report or document or website or however you think about it as being a more important unit.
Yeah, I love the debate in the go around here. Not to mention insights and information that don't make the report, right? Still nuggets, but just not quite important enough to make it to that final report. Like, say somebody comes in and it's like, I need everything we've ever learned about onboarding. Well, that's a time when you need those tags. We need to level set where we are, and I want everything that has to do with this topic. And so those searchable content, maybe back to Lori's point, but do you lose context? What about onboarding? You know, but at least there is the opportunity to gather everything that didn't quite make the cut in a report.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that's something that we're starting to see, like Lorie and Matt have kind of talked about. We're starting to see products picking around the edges of that problem, right? So like EnjoyHQ's version of this is stories. So they're essentially larger, higher level vehicles for taking insights, whether they're from entire reports or summaries that you've written on a topic, or like orphaned insights that may not have like, or maybe not part of a larger summary that are still relevant to whatever you're trying to do. I think the key thing with those and with a lot of these tools, and it reflects this thinking, is that it's a very manual process, right? It still requires a lot of hand curation and it requires a lot of thought. So one way you could look at that is job security, but at the other hand, it speaks very much to this challenge of being able to kind of comprehensively stitch together disparate pieces of information with varying degrees of context into something that's entirely new. I think one place that we have found value in kind of those meta roll-ups of information is for new hires, right? People come into a new space. Jen, when you say like, what do we know about onboarding? It's like, well, that's a lot, but we have noticed these big trends with onboarding, right? They're well supported. We're already kind of operating within a certain bound of context that we can be confident the insights that we're attaching are relevant. And in those kind of big blocks of insight, we can kind of produce or deliver that to someone who's new and help them get up to speed more quickly. So that's where we have found some early value.
All right, great. Thanks for that. That was fun. Woo, that was a good tangent. I love it. So what if you don't have the resources, the money to buy a tool? Any suggestions on what can you do to kind of be scrappy and work with what you've got? Eric, you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm trying to remember. I don't think we paid for Coda. Like, I think we, or it wasn't much, because I don't remember like having to ask for a lot of budget. Well, I think then what I would do, like, yeah, if you have, I think everyone, even Matthew who works at Microsoft, is strapped for resources. Like, that is just a fact of life. And I think what we did was we listed out all the like possible benefits we could get from an archive. So for example, like I mentioned before, a product manager could go and find their own answer without bothering the researcher. It can give us a way to keep track of all the projects we're working on. It sets an expectation that when you're done with something, it has to have a report. Because sometimes not researchers, but other people who did research in the company wouldn't really produce that. They thought it was fine to just like send a Slack message or something. It was like, no, we have to store it so that we can reference it, etc. But what we did is we like listed those and we prioritized them and said, okay, sure, an archive has the potential to deliver lots of benefits, but let's pick the ones that we really care most about and then optimize for that. So I think, especially for someone who's resource constrained, that's probably my best advice, is to just like, don't get too excited about all the potential things the thing can do. Just really make sure that it does the one thing it needs to do really well for you. And then you can always change your mind later and iterate.
Thanks for that. Lorie, do you have a perspective?
I was chatting in the chat because there's like 1,001 questions. So what was the question again?
The question is, you don't have money to buy a tool.
Oh, the tool, yeah. Pray. And again, seriously, like if you need a tool and you can't convince your organization to get you that tool, do you need to stay there? Because they're obviously not supporting your job or the tools you need to do your job. If you need to stay there, you want to stay there, spreadsheet's better than nothing. Airtable's better than nothing. See if there's any internal tool that your company already owns that you can leverage to put repo type things into. So maybe it doesn't store the videos. Maybe there's a link to every video on Google Drive or something for the time being. Maybe you need to work really hard to figure out what is the POC, the proof of concept that I have to prove in order to get the budget for the tool, figure that out and work towards that goal to see if you can get budget for the tool. And then when you do, pick a tool, any tool, they all kind of do the same thing. Like I said before, nobody's going to solve your problems 100%, but it'll be a good place to start.
I wanted to build on what Lorie said and kind of speaking to my own experience as a research manager in my prior life. I think there are a ton of ways you can just store, like, let's say you're writing your report up in a presentation software or docs or emails, whatever. You can just, there'll be a place where you can put those and get back to them. It might not be great, but it'll be okay. I think the other interesting thing to think about is, like, culturally, what is your research team doing in terms of curating knowledge that you think is useful over the longer term? What I used to do with my team is, like, just have a running list of, look, we should really be experts in these topics. What is the knowledge we should be building towards? What is our plan to get there? And what is our plan to have a living document, even if, or a wiki, or like whatever super basic thing. Like, we used to do it in just a Word doc of, like, here are things we know about. We're working on a digital store for the first time. Okay, well, we should know some things about stores. Well, we're doing a bunch of research, usability studies, a lot of that sort of thing, but we should be learning about kind of the patterns and experiences of stores and first run experiences in stores and all sorts of stuff. Let's create a place where we'll put those insights. And it does require a tremendous amount of discipline from you as a manager and your team to be able to do that and try and prioritize building out some of that work. But the best tool in the world is, well, I'd like to think we're going to try and build that tool, but it's really tricky. That tool doesn't really exist. It's more a cultural problem or a thing for you to prioritize in your research team. Do we care about curating this high level knowledge on key topics or not? And if you don't, then yeah, like, just pop your stuff in some sort of folder structure and make sure you can search across it. And it's going to be just degrees of improvement potentially over that.
I'd really love to kind of connect these two threads, because I really love what Lorie and Matt and what all three of you have kind of talked about here. And just starting with Lorie's advice for, like, looking for tools that you already have within your organization as a potential starting point. It's amazing. Like, having started to wade into procurement waters, it's amazing all the stuff we have that people don't know we have. Like, it's really kind of incredible. And so, like, being scrappy and looking for things that you might be able to co-opt, even if it's in a proof of concept capacity, to help you get started. But it has another kind of implicit benefit, I think, that kind of talks to, Matt, what you mentioned, and that's getting to understand the culture of your organization better. Like, what tools they're using to do what kind of jobs, what's working well, what isn't getting used at all, what's getting used all the time. Those are things that you can help better understand how your organization operates, and in turn, like, how they might consume research, which could then guide whether you're building a tool from scratch or you're picking a tool from a vendor. Like, that can help you make really, really informed decisions that can save you a lot of heartache later.
Perfect. So let's think about what you need to consider when you're kind of just starting a repository. What do they need to know to get started? What are your tips and tricks on, like, all right, you're going to start a repository, don't forget this or do this? Lorie?
Well, I think you need to do a needs assessment, because
Talk about that.
Well, what are the problems you're trying to solve? You're trying to create a team of 10 out of 1. A repo won't do that for you. If you are trying to create a place that other people could query, it might help. Just a place for you to query, it might help. Do you need help with transcription? Do you need help with creating video clips and getting faster with video clips by using the transcript and searching in the transcript to find the video clip that you need to do? Do you need help you, meaning your team, need help trying to see the bigger picture, the forest through the trees, because you're all working on different business lines and you have no idea what each person's up to? A repo could help with that. What is it, the problem that you are trying to solve with this tool? figure that out first, come up with a list of features that you would like this tool to have, and then go out and look at the different ones. Just like user Zoom and user testing, there's really only a handful of tools out there that are really, really out of the box, things that you can unpack and use tomorrow. Go look at them, see how they measure up against your feature list that you've come up with. And don't forget about your dev teams and your product teams as well, and your designers who will be consuming, hopefully, the information that gets put into this repo, and think about the features they might want to see too.
Thanks for that. Matt, I know you did, you know, maybe from the build perspective, what were you thinking about when you needed to build?
Well, I mean, I think I can even speak to just what are the two things that, like the core things that I think you should know, just starting out, the real basics. And one is think about the cost value trade-off for the individual, how much work, well, firstly, if in your organization, there's like downward kind of authoritarian power, that sounds really extreme is why I worded it. But, you know, sometimes there's a leader who says, look, we're going to put everything in a repository. We're going to do it right. And here's the process. Let's do it. If you have that, that's fine. Often you don't. So you really need to think about why people are going to put it in. What's the incentive for them? How much time is it going to take? How much friction is there? And if you can't solve for their personal value they're going to get out of it, then you might not bother starting because it will devolve. And there can be personal value to it for people, or you can bring down the amount of energy that's required to put it in, but you need to kind of solve for that early, or have kind of top level buy-in and someone who can help drive it through and make it a priority for people who are like kind of want to do it, but sort of don't find the time. And then the second one is you should consider until automatic machine intelligence gets there, which it might in the near future. But until then, I would say consider just paying someone to do the metadata. And that actually relates to the point before around the cost value. Like, how do you just make it so people don't have to spend energy having accurate metadata so people can slice and dice and search? Just two things to think about.
Okay. Eric, any thoughts, tips and tricks on setting up a repository?
I'm just gonna +1 Lorie. Know what you need and make sure that you get the top needs solved first, and then take it from there.
All right. How about you, Jared?
Yeah, I think everyone here has really covered it well. I think it does come down to, at the end of the day, just knowing, it's somebody in the comments joked, it's like, so you mean doing research? I'm like, yeah, exactly, that's it. It's just really like understanding the needs of your stakeholders in your organization at large. Just like any good research project, right? You want to make sure you're solving for the right problem from the outset and asking the right questions from the outset.
Absolutely. So how do you get buy-in? How do you get buy-in from your team? How do you get buy-in from your partners to use this? I know, Eric, you mentioned it's okay if the designers or PMs ask us. Some people don't want to be asked questions. Just use the repository. I can see the pros of that too. I'm just kidding. But how do you get buy-in? What are some of the tactics that you have used to help move the team along to adopt? Is this a big change? So what do you do to get everybody on board?
I can speak a little bit to what I did. It started with just reaching consensus amongst our team that we had a collective problem, right? Like we shared the same challenges and problems, and we all agreed we needed some approach that, like Lorie mentioned, like coming up with a list of features that we thought might help address this problem, or thematically things we wanted to solve for. I wound up doing a proof of concept stage and vendor evaluation stage, and then ultimately presented that to our VP of design for approval. And that was, like I said, about a six month process end to end. And we're fortunate to have a really supportive research and design culture at Okta. And so that was something that we got an open ear to from the outset. I know that's not always the case, or it can be a challenge, but I think just coming prepared and showing that you've looked at the spectrum of the problem and looked at examples and looked at the competitors and done your homework I think really is kind of one way to get there.
Matt, you have a perspective how to get adoption, buy-in?
Yeah, there are two levels for that. One is if you're trying to get it off the ground. We sort of just started building a prototype and, using some money that we had to just get it running because we couldn't get it approved otherwise. And then once we got it running, then we could show it and then get ongoing funding. So that's one thing on that side. Might work if you're able. In terms of getting people engaged, like non-researchers using it, which is a question a little bit in the comments. What we've been trying to do with some awesome success and some other places less success is try and drive the usage of our repository upstream in the researchers' process for sharing. If they are if they're like authoring their research and presenting it and doing everything with the team, and then it's like an afterthought to put it in the repository, it really is this like tax. Whereas if you can provide value upstream to use the repository as kind of a key place where you're sharing the preliminary results, and then as it comes together, the more detailed results, and stakeholders are coming there to consume that, and you'll send out your message to the team like, hey, the results are here, come take a look early, and it's not like an afterthought. Then those stakeholders start to learn, oh, this repository is a place where I can get insights, all of the stuff is here. And then it's a way you can start actually driving ongoing engagement. You can learn about your stakeholders. You can know what their interests are from a platform standpoint or an analytics standpoint, or whether or not that applies to you. You can really, you want to get it early in the process to get people learning about that system.
Thanks for that. Eric, any thoughts?
I did the same thing as Lorie. I was reading comments. Are we still talking about buy-in?
We are.
We could just stop and we'll just chat.
So, I mean, I'm just like, I want to like bring some of the commenters in because like people definitely have more experience with this than I do based on their very insightful comments. I mean, I don't know. Like, I think it's for us at Thumbtack, getting buy-in from like people outside of the research team wasn't necessarily like a prerequisite to do it, because like, again, we optimized for the value it gave us, right? Like it gave us a faster way to find our own work and our immediate colleagues' works and the work from these like adjacent teams that also did research. Like that was actually a huge value. Like PMM, for example, did a lot of research at Thumbtack because they had the skills to do so and they had questions that our team couldn't answer. So, but they had like, different norms around sharing. They had different norms around, rigor. They had different norms around storage, and bringing all that together was really helpful because then you could also be able to show them and other stakeholders the difference sometimes between studies and like which types of insights to perhaps draw larger conclusions from and perhaps which ones to be more careful with. At Facebook or Instagram, where I work now, the research library that we have is very different, right? And I actually think it is primarily, again, though, a tool for researchers. So like we are required to upload all our work there. And I don't actually use it very much because it's a lot faster for me to just search on like our internal communications platform, Workplace, to find work that I have shared or someone else has. But I know that there are other stakeholders in the company for whom the library is incredibly important. And again, I think it goes back to like, yeah, that buy-in just needs to come from the people for whom you're really designing it and making sure. So then it almost becomes less of buy-in and more about, are you actually giving them the value that they need?
Excellent. Lorie?
For us at GitLab, we didn't have to get buy-in. We had money, we could go buy a tool, fine. But one of the things that kept it going was this concept around, that's great. What the hell are we going to do with this stuff that you found out? Are we doing anything with it? I don't even know. Do we even need researchers? Because are we even doing anything with what you people do? So it became a way to start to track the impact of research. So not only put the research in here, but now we're going to try to abstract out the impact. And so the way that we did that was we had all the insights in Dovetail. But then we pulled out what we called actionable insights, which was basically the definition was something somebody could do something about, and put that back into the GitLab repo and tagged the proper PMs who were responsible for that part of the product, as well as there's a tagging system in the repo product, and we tagged it as actionable insights. And so tagging it in that system allowed us to pull metrics to see what we call them issues or merge requests, which ones were open still after a month, after 2 months, after 6 months, which ones had been closed and marked as addressed. So we could see like which ones are actually getting pulled into the product, by who, at what point, and then we could go ask why. Why didn't you put this into the product? What happened to this? Because one of the chat questions was like, what do you do with stuff that happened a week ago and the product changed, or 6 months ago and the product changed? So we wanted to try to capture some of that way and dovetail, and going back, oddly enough, and using GitLab as a repo helped with that.
Excellent, thank you. So I know that there are a million great questions in the chat, and we've addressed a few of them along the way. I appreciate that the speakers are kind of staying on top of that, probably better than I am. But I am gonna ask, it's getting a little late, and so I am gonna ask one question from the chat, but we might have to do a follow-up panel. I might have to do some follow-up questions, and maybe we could do a recording or something, because there's so many good questions from the audience that I would love your perspective on as well. So let's think about that. But before we go, our final question is, what kind of ethical concerns might there be around a research repository? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Looks like Eric, looks like you have some thoughts on that. Or if you need a moment to think and anybody else has anybody can chime in.
I guess, something that's obviously, when you're talking about the storage of a lot of personally identifiable information, PII in a large volume, that's always a concern, right? For participant privacy, we do also deal with healthcare companies, so there's that. But it really is something that we think a lot about, and it's something that's an ongoing discussion when we think about our research repository. There's a lot of differing kind of guidance and governance in terms of how much information do you remove or obfuscate, or and striking that balance with needing the additional context about the person you're talking to. That's the constant push-pull. It's like, well, no, I need to know this person's information, not their personal identifiable information, but I need to know what organization they work for. Sometimes it's helpful to know if you've talked to the same person in different contexts, to look to see if there are patterns in the feedback they've given to you over, say, like a year or 2 years. Do they tend to bring up the same things when you talk to them? So there's always that kind of like tension and push-pull between like how storing the least amount of information about a participant that we can, where we're protecting them while still being able to derive the most out of the time we have with them. And this also extends to other ways we integrate with the repository, things like capturing consent and NDAs, and being able to think about things like being able to prime participants prior to their participation with a clear code of ethics and guidelines of their expectations and their expectations of us, and things like that. So there's a lot that feeds into that, but it's definitely a give and take, but participant privacy is always at the forefront.
Yeah, and to that point Jared made, we also at Okta use Respondent, user testing, the live conversations, as well as a couple of other different platforms. And we have to make sure that those platforms can support our NDA. And then our procurement process that Jared is very, very faithful to will ensure that their NDA, that their panelists agree to, matches with ours. So we do try to cover it for those reasons, so they're not sharing anything that we're going to show them. But internally, you have to build a culture of, this is a customer or potential customer. This isn't someone who you should treat unfairly or with lack of respect. You really shouldn't treat anybody like that. But like you have to build that culture into the company so that you don't have people who think it's cool to pull a clip and pass it around because somebody said something funny. I've had that happen at a place where I used to work, and it's just right up there with them showing up in the lab and laughing so loudly behind the mirror that your participant can hear them. That happens too. It's the same thing. So you have to kind of just build that culture, reiterate, we treat everything with respect. This is data. This is a person's thoughts and processes. And, whether it's a cancer patient talking about their path to recovery, somebody's car getting repoed because their spouse passed away, or just an IT admin complaining to me about some setting that they hate. It's all stuff that's sensitive to them and it's very important to them, and they're sharing it with you, the researcher, and I'm sharing it with my product managers and my devs and my designers. And I want them to understand that it's sacred, that trust that they instill in us. And luckily, I work in a wonderful place and they do, but it's a culture that you may have to build depending on where you are.
Thank you. Eric or Matt, any thoughts?
I mean, I don't think a repository has any additional ethical considerations than the rest of your research practice. If anything, if you're nervous about starting a repository because it will expose data in ways, you should probably stop working on the repository and work on your data storage and shared practices first.
All
Yeah.
right, well,
Yeah.
go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just saying ditto. Yeah, I mean, you got to make sure it's before it gets into the repository that it's all shipshape.
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna wrap with a classic researcher question, and this is for everyone or no one to answer. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about that we didn't go into tonight? Anything else you'd like to share? Any final thoughts?
Gosh, there's just so much. There's so much that happened in the chat that I couldn't even get to. Yeah, I know this is something that is very salient to all of our interests at this point. I think we are constantly trying as a people to do more with less. And a lot of times repos are seen as that magic holy grail that will allow us to do more with just one tool. All we need is one tool. But I think that the panelists tonight have done a really great job in hopefully communicating that it's not just a tool, it's a whole set of processes and a whole support system that you have to have in order to leverage that tool in the right way to push your organization forward.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's absolutely a company culture consideration. I think I would also just add that I'll be the relentless optimist here and say you could do it. You could do it. We didn't have a repo 2 years ago. And I think my advice would be just start small, start scrappy, and start scoped. Yay, schemas. But I think really just thinking tactically. I know there's a lot of folks out there who are teams of one. And I think in those cases, sometimes it feels like a disadvantage that you're by yourself. But the other thing that you have an advantage of is your process better than anyone. And at least in the beginning, you only have to cater to you. So start there. And really you don't have to, like Lorie said, you're never going to buy your way out of this problem. And even I think Matt has shown even building comes with challenges, right? With all the power and flexibility, there's no silver bullet. And so just really think deeply about what your team needs, what your organization needs, and start really.
Great. Matt, final thoughts?
I had a few things I wanted to hit, and we hit them all. So yeah, I just wish everyone the best of luck, and just reemphasize a lot of it is about culture more than tooling. And if you can get the culture right in your team, and then the rest can follow. The tooling is not that important if you get the culture right.
Excellent. Eric?
That's really similar to my last thought. It's like I had this accidental benefit from building an archive, which is, in order for it to work, I mentioned this before, if the thing that gets submitted is a report, then every project has to end with a report. And for the researchers on my team, of course, that always happened. But then it turns out that some of these other teams who were doing research that was actually done really well, never put that into something that was worthy of being called a report. So this actually highlighted to me as a research manager at the time the importance of communicating to them why it is so important that you distill your findings and communicate them well, so that I wasn't just saying oh, put your long list of notes into a doc and submit it. No, you actually have to put in the effort of synthesizing and consolidating and communicating what you're learning. And that, of course, that is actually the main thing that people pushed me back on, because they were like, that's extra work. And I'm like, well, that is how you make your work valuable. So that was a nice accidental thing. So maybe that's my last thought. It's think about how the tool you're building, what types of habits it's going to encourage in your organization. Because that is often the case. If you think of it, if you walk into a room and all the chairs are set up facing the front, you're automatically going to assume someone is going to stand up front and tell you what to do. That is a habit shaped by the structure of that room. And software tools work the same way. There are norms around email. That's why Slack is so powerful. And that's going to happen with your research repository tool also. So yeah, those are my last thoughts.
Yeah, that's really great. What I've loved the most about tonight's discussion, I mean, yes, a tool is important, but we covered so many other things that you need to consider. And I think that was my personal goal of kind of hoping that's where this would flow. And I'm glad that we did talk about other things, taxonomy and structure and all the other things that go along. It's not just pick a tool off the shelf and it's good to go. There's so many other considerations when it comes to our repository and sharing out our insights with our team and our partners. So thank you so much for that. I think everybody give a applause, use the emoji, show your hand, show your video, all those things. Let our panelists know that they were fantastic, not because I'm saying that they were, but you know that they were too. So thank you so much. Loved it. Mallory's going to throw the link to our survey in the chat. And please let us know what you thought and how we can improve on future events. And I am going to share my screen for a little bit because we're going to break out into rooms. So we're going to have our little networking session right now. So thanks again to all our panelists. You're welcome to join if you choose, but giving people time to drop off, if they're not really feeling like being social right now, I can respect that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Again, thank you all. Thanks to our panelists. Have a great afternoon, evening, if you're signing off. Here we go. 1 second. So again, Mallory is throwing up the survey link in the chat. Whoops. Let's share this. All right, sharing the right screen. It says follow-up survey, follow-up. See that? Am I on the right? Is it sharing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
It was doing weird stuff. Thank you. All right, so fill out the survey. There's going to be a link to it in the chat. I don't know, Mallory, did you throw that in there? I missed it if you did. And it's also going to be up in a follow-up email that will be coming your way later on, probably tomorrow. So we have a few house rules. This is a respectful community. It's really important that we treat everybody with respect and give everyone a chance to speak. There's a lot of introverts. They don't like to speak. There's loud people like me that jump right in and speak, but give everybody a chance to speak. Also get your LinkedIn link ready. Throw that in the chat when you go into your breakout rooms and talk to your friends. We want you to be kind and empathetic and assume positive intent and no offensive comments. Again, just basic human being stuff, folks. Be good to people. That's all we're asking. So When you go into your breakout room, again, have your LinkedIn handle ready to go, or a LinkedIn link, so that you can share that with your community. We're going to go into a breakout room. We're going to go in there for like 12 minutes or so, 12 to 15 minutes, probably 4 to 5 people. When you go there, tell everybody what your name is. Tell them what your specialty is. Are you a designer, researcher, strategist, product manager, chef, whatever you are? Let them know what you're kind of into. And then our networking question is, what did you think about the take on research repositories? Not just the tools, but what was talked about tonight. Let's talk about what we learned, and maybe share some other resources or stories that we're interested in, is that might be helpful to others, or just share what you thought. So I am going to stop sharing. So again, it is what interests you about the panel, and I'm going to, I should have got these rooms a little bit more ready than I did. So let's go ahead. You have to hit join. It's going to send you into breakout rooms and you have to hit join. So I'm going to do that now, maybe 12, 15 minutes, and then we'll pull you back into the main lobby and we'll just have a general chit chat amongst each other. All right, so why don't we do that? Just want to make sure we're good to go here. 1 second. Oh, I got too many rooms going. 1 second. Let me fix that. All right, here we go. See you in a few minutes.
What you're asking.
Yeah, at my company, when we could buy in to get a repository, we were 2 researchers and a head of UX who could also do research. And we had one person who really loves tools, and she investigated it, and we taught her some requirements that we thought were relevant. Yeah, and then we ended up with EnjoyHQ, which has some awesome features. And some features, I have to say, especially now, right now, it's just me. So we're just hiring a new head of UX and we need more researchers, but right now it's just me. And I have 0 time to manage anything around it. I do upload the videos because there's a transcription feature in it that's really great. That I really love, and it saves me time, because sometimes when you can't quite remember something from your notes and you wonder, what the heck does that mean? Then I can just do a text search and then I find immediately the transcript, the text bit, and that is linked to the video, so that if you find the text area, you know where in the video it is. So that's really great. But in terms of tagging and all that, I can't do that. And also I'm worried, what if at some point somebody says, no, you don't get the money anymore, you can't use it, and then all the data is in there. So I've been keeping it in Google Drive like we used to, just to make sure, because it's proprietary software and I want to be able to have it available if I need to, in terms of data management. So I'd like to trial it more with somebody else who's also a researcher, but I've not had the opportunity. So so I understand where your question is coming from, and you have to think about it twice.
Just riffing off on what Doris said, is it just me who has issues with the transcription services, which are AI-led? Because the atomic insights and everything that these guys talk about, I can't really, copy paste them from the transcripts. I literally have to sit and, correct the transcript, which is literally me doing from hello, introduction, and then thank you for whatever, till the entire period. And so the entire, then on top of it, the tagging, processing, highlighting, picking out clips, reels, all of that, it just sort of becomes redundant. And at that point of time, I've sort of consumed the data so many times that I'm just ready to spit out the final report. instead of sort of making it into snackable things. So, at least in terms of the question that Kim was raising, I'm not really sure if anybody has any sort of process, given the fact that the tools that are meant to help us are not really doing the job that they are meant to do in its entirety, or to its full capacity, or at least that's the problem that I tend to encounter almost on a daily, hourly basis. So
you sparked a really fascinating topic, in my opinion, which has to do with where that data lives. Like sometimes those insights, like it just occurred to me that sometimes those insights might be better like attributed to a persona, for example, right? It may not be just an insight that sort of hangs there in some space, but you can like put it somewhere. And yeah, I'm not sure exactly where to go with that, but it feels like there's an opportunity to think about the larger research ecosystem.
But the problem with that those sort of insights, you have to be, at least I tend to be very careful with it, because it sort of gets very difficult to sort of get internal stakeholders, whether it's the design team or the product team, to sort of make them understand the traceability of it, as to where that sort of insight is coming from. So those sort of orphans things, you'll have to sort of find way and sort of bundle it with something which has a traceable route to it, if that sort of makes sense.
I really like the idea of thinking of traceability, because that's what I think is so valuable, is as you flow through from your research through your experience design process and your roadmap process and your backlog process, there needs to be traceability all the way through, so that the people that are producing something know what the outcome is that they're aiming for and why they're doing it. It helps to bring meaning into their lives, for one thing, and into their work. But it seems to me that all the research that informed that particular thing should be accessible, so that people can kind of refer back as like, why, because my big question with this is, who's the audience? Like what is the use case for using a repository as you're moving through your development process? Like, what is the real use case for that? Are people actually going to stop and go, wait a minute, I'm going to go and re-look at all those videos and make sure that what I'm building right now is the right thing? It seems to me that synthesis is really important, and that the bulk of the research that fed into the synthesis and the ultimate synthesis and insights that are feeding into things that are actually being created, that's the important aspect of the database element of the repository, is beyond the repository itself into the other tools that are being used in the organization that are producing the experiences that are aimed at the outcomes of hopefully the experience vision, or at least the strategy or the roadmap of the organization.
Yes, so I already in our little chat room or breakout room before, us saying that I have the problem that when I try to prepare the research insights from a piece of research into atomic nuggets, and then do that for several pieces in order to sort of, so our use case would be to cross-synthesize to see what are the things that came up that were not actually topic of this specific study, but they came up anyway. And I do want to capture them somewhere so that later on I can look at them, right? And if I then go across several projects, and then I try to quantify, so how important a thing is this? Yeah, is it just one person telling the same thing 10 times? Or one organization with several individuals always going on about it, but nobody else has that experience? Or is it really a universal pattern? And I've not seen a repository that can enable this process easily, because what I tried, you see the nuggets, the atoms, but you don't see the context. You have to, for each little nugget, you have to click and click until you know, oh, this is where it's coming from. But by then, honestly, my head has forgotten what I'm really after. I get lost. So I have a use case, but I don't have a process that really fulfills that, even though the tools seem to indicate it can do that. But it's the process and the culture around it that we haven't figured out.
Absolutely. I think that research is really more like a live concert than a recording. And that's how it should be treated. And it's responsive to the audience at the time, and it's ethereal. People walk away with their impressions and their emotions and their feelings around that performance. And they may or may not buy the CD or, do it on Spotify or whatever. But to focus a ton of energy and a ton of resources on building up this tool with the hopes that you're going to have some kind of valuable, useful thing, it would seem to me that that money and effort is well spent elsewhere, well spent sitting down with a developer, talking about the research that you just did, and inviting those developers to join your research. And if it's travel costs or whatever, it seems to me that that would be a better use of it. And the most important thing for your repository is a proper naming convention, so that you can, just do basic indexing in terms of finding things.
Yeah, to use more for synthesis and analysis rather than managing up, in a sense.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just going to say that I think what comes to mind is, especially in all this discussion of repositories and how might you use them for, your particular situation, I think it's sort of like, if you think of it, what just occurred to me is, if you think about it in terms of, when you're building a new product, you have to consider the use cases, you have to consider the end goal, what are people going to be doing with it? So every research repository is going to be different depending on what the use cases are, who the end users are going to be. Are product managers looking at your research? Are they just designers? Is it the C-suite? Who's consuming this information? So then what information needs to be there? And specifically for where I'm at, we didn't have research. So I finally was able to get a researcher to help, who's doing the competitive analysis and kind of foundational research and going through all the calls that I've gone through in the past. And we use Avoma for sales. And I was just like, well, I'm using that now because it has transcripts. You can highlight things, you can mark things as a pain point or a goal, or and they don't sell it to researchers. So I just ping them all the time, like, it'd be great for researchers, and maybe you should sell this to research, because researchers will use this. You can highlight things and tag things and comment on things and create snippets. And then I'm having my researcher pull those snippets that are referencing different feature sets that we know are have pervasive issues that we can't get to, but we need to gather all of that data so that when we get to that project and improving that feature, we have all of those snippets together. So he's creating a snippet playlist of all of those things, and they all reference back to the original call. So you can see the context if you so choose. But yeah, I think for us, we're looking at it I want to kind of start it out so that future projects, anyone can gather the data, know what people were saying, and again, to Doris's point, quantify how many times is that coming up. Also, integrations is important, hoping to get something with Zendesk, because support tickets are just not searchable to find where people are complaining about certain things. And then, because we are a B2B SaaS, so then we want to be able to contact that company if we're doing targeted research and interviews in the future. So how might we search the Zendesk in a way that is going to pull the data so that we can use those tickets later on as reference points, and to quantify how often this is coming up, and for road mapping in the future. So, we have a lot of use cases. And so that's where I'm not really sure what we're doing or what my point was, but yeah. And it's not that late here. I'm in California, but today was long.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Miley. I don't have all the answers, and I don't know if anyone here does, but they're probably going through a lot of the same struggles, for sure. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts about what was covered tonight? Matt's still here if you wanted to ask Matt a specific question.
I was just going to say that I recommend this to every single newbie and anyone trying to get into meetups or networking or anything. I always recommend this group because it always has really great panels. Thank you, Matt, for sharing and being here, and so many great attendees who have there's always amazing people in my breakout groups.
Yeah,
It's kind of
appreciate
ridiculous.
that too. Yeah.
We've talked about that.
I have a question. Has anybody else tried to remotely collaborate at the same time using a research repository?
Speak a little bit more to that, Doris.
So
what do you mean collaborate?
my colleague, product manager in the States, me in New Zealand. We were in a Google Meet or Zoom or whatever we used. And we wanted to tag, so we had to run the sessions together, remote sessions. And then we had the interviews uploaded into EnjoyHQ, and we wanted to do all the tagging together. Yeah, and it didn't update. So when whoever of us was selecting and typing, etc., the other one always had to do a refresh, and there was a bit of a pain. So I was wondering if there is any tool that anybody has used that did work.
We had to use Google Docs for that, and then we had to take the Google Docs we made with the comments. We can use that live and take it to Notion. We used Notion at the time. It was like an exit. It wasn't the best one.
Yeah, okay. So what we've done, at some point we gave up and we exported what we already had into Mural, which actually worked quite well, because the way it was, we could then each sort of thing was just creating one post-it, and then we just followed our usual way. But we had wanted to try it all in EnjoyHQ. That didn't work.
Yeah, but I agree with that. So we've done a fair bit of remote research and development work, and we've mainly used Miro. So we definitely haven't had the same scale and needing the challenge of looking at insights across multiple projects for a single client or multiple clients yet. But that's one of the things that we're interested in kind of hearing about today, of how people are taking on that challenge. But I think to exactly what Linda mentioned a little bit earlier around that traceability, and what Arvin mentioned is let's say you've got that research, and it could be quantitative, qualitative, could be complaints data, it could be website analysis, Google Analytics, it could be interview, observation work, diary studies, whatever it is, chucking all that in. And if let's say it's a video, just putting a link to a recording which you might have elsewhere on Google Drive, on Vimeo, wherever you might have recorded it. But what we found was, yeah, Miro, haven't used Mural as much, but Miro has been quite good at collaboratively going through, rearranging things, adding tags, adding emojis to them. One tip I would say is, if you are using it, then it helps, because you can, there are integrations with other tools already out of the box. You have to pay for them, unfortunately, for some of them. But just simply exporting into Excel, and then from Excel, there's a lot of things you can do. Obviously, CSV files can go anywhere pretty much these days. But one of the things I would suggest is, for that traceability, sometimes, let's say, if you start off with an interview with someone, you might have an empathy map, you might have, you know, just all the raw bits of detail that they said, all the key observations, all the key quotes, let's say, all in one area. And then you want to do some thematic analysis, or you want to do something, you want to put it into some sort of structured analysis, let's say. One thing in the past that I've done is, rather than just moving that across and just saying that this post-it note came from this person, making a copy of all of those and then rearranging those. So if I find a post-it note that links back to that source, then I can look at what was the context that this was said in. So in case I do need to, in case we get to the point where we've gone, you know, the observations and evidence through to the insights, through to the problem statement or opportunities that means for us, through to then the ideas or features, and then through to the backlog of user stories in order to deliver those features. So having that traceability, sometimes we might have a moment where we're in development and someone says, hey, look, we can't do that, or that's going to be much more expensive than if we did this. So then we can go back and say, well, why did we arrive at that idea? And you can work backwards and go, well, this was the pain it solved. So if we have this new idea, will that solve that original pain? Yes or no? And then you can go from there. So that kind of traceability is something we'd be looking for in a tool. But Miro, it sounds very simple. It's not Excel or it's definitely not Dovetail or EnjoyHQ. I haven't even looked at any of those, but it's definitely solved our needs for now.
In the academic field, there is Atlas TI. I don't know if everyone knows about it. Atlas TI solved this problem in the academic research field by adding relational links to, say, nuggets or say of this what you've been saying. So if we have like 10 nuggets and we have to click on them and know each one of them in each tag that nugget has. The Atlas TI has a feature that adds these relational links. So it adds like this nugget explain this insight and this nugget relates to this insight. And as you go adding the information in your research, it finds a map, like a broad map of the foundations of your research and the foundations of relationships. There is another tool which does this very well, which is Obsidian. It's a new tool which people have been using in anthropology, and it has this map which basically does what you've been saying as well. So it's some tools for us to check out.
Thanks for sharing that, Luis. Appreciate it. Haven't heard of those tools, so it's always good to learn about new tools that are out there. Eric, you have your hand up. Was that just to, no, okay.
Indeed, that was from the last one, yes.
Okay, just making sure. How about one more question or comment before we wrap up for the night? Anyone?
Well, this was my very first UX research strategy event, and this was pretty awesome. So thank you, Jen, for moderating, and to all the panelists and all of the attendees. This was really cool. I can't believe I didn't know about this until recently. Where have I been?
Well, thank you. Tell your friends. We always want more and more peeps coming. Appreciate that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Post-pandemic, when we finally get back to a normal life, if we ever get back to a normal life, do you think you'll be having some of these still remotely, or will you go back to in person? Because I know you guys are in Texas.
Yeah, we're going to end everything once the pandemic is over, right? When is the pandemic ever going to be over? I'm totally kidding, right? Like, what's normal? Who knows? That's a good question, Elizabeth. I mean, we may have an occasional, we've talked about this as a group, right? We may have an occasional get together in Dallas because that's kind of our roots, but not all of our board members are even in Dallas. So, but we're going to stay online. Our community is the world. It's global now. And how could we not include everybody, right? Everybody's part of the UX research strat community now. So I don't see, it would be a rare occasion if we had something in person. It would probably involve cocktails, just because that's me. But I see us always going to have online, virtual, global events.
Great. Thank you. I look forward to more of these. They're all great.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. David, hand up.
Yeah. So first off, thank you so much for hosting this. I mean, this was amazing. I am brand new to UX, developer here, but it was awesome, great getting feedback. And, it's as far as, I thought it was really interesting about, trying to catalog all your insights and I guess the question I would have is, have you ever had a situation where maybe your insights were just incorrect, or maybe you just kind of want to say, okay, maybe they're old, maybe they're historical, that they don't no longer apply? Because I mean, reality is you're going to be constantly reworking those personas, reworking, discovering new findings that might eventually kind of kick the old insights to be less important. Like, is that, I'm just curious how you manage that sort of thing.
That is the thing, right? Especially on evaluative, like user testing. As the design changes and evolves, some of those old test results are not applicable anymore. So I don't know how every company, I'm kind of the mindset of, I don't want you to trash everything, but you also have to consider you're viewing a point in time. I think Lorie was talking a little bit about that too, the context around. You can't just be like, oh, this green button worked really well. Well, we haven't been branded with green for 4 years. So I don't care what that said before. That doesn't apply here anymore, right? Like, be real. So, I mean, I'm not making fun of you or anything, David. I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't throw anything away, but also keep in mind, if something's a few years old and it's kind of like usability testing or something like that, it might be a little dated. Anybody else have a perspective on that? Or David, do you have a follow-up? Or
I was just going to say to that point too, as a developer, sometimes there are bits and pieces of features that are left hanging around from, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And having that historical context is really important, because you try to trace back, hey, look, this is an area of feature where a bug was found, or hey, maybe there's a bug here, but in reality, is it really a bug? Maybe it was maybe it was something from a previous design or previous feature that is kind of maybe technically not a bug. Like, where was that historical context made, and why was that, even more important, why was that decision made?
We talked about that in our group, and we brought up the topic of corporate amnesia. So I think somebody was saying designers tend to think, well, I did the research and I implemented it, so I don't need to document it. But what if that designer leaves? And what if in 6 months somebody's asking, well, why was it done that way? Where's the backup? Where's the data that's backing up that decision? Having that in a repository, you can go and find that and see for yourself why exactly something was done.
Yeah, I also have something for that. So we've tried EnjoyHQ. I found it cumbersome to tag everything. And we use, though, a Confluence catalog with all our research findings, so that we have an easily accessible source of the memory of what happened at our company. And I insist on always including who did we recruit, what were the criteria, so that people who look at the research in retrospect can understand the context in which it was sitting, so that they can, even if things have changed, they can sort of see it from the description in the beginning. And what I'm also doing is, so for example, we underwent 2 mergers recently. We recently had a high turnover of people, and I simply start the conversation again. Research that I presented 2 years ago, I say, okay, we have done this research, it was in this context, and it answers the following questions, but now we have this other situation, and I think that this raises these and these questions, and let's explore them together. So I make sure that I give the context. So, I mean, I think it's great to have a repository where people can just browse by themselves, but I still think it belongs into a context, and you have to keep the conversation going. So research that just sort of sits there is sort of a little bit dead. I think you have to make sure that people listen to it, people understand it, and then also engage with the other people and learn from them. How has the situation changed? If it's like your sister company, what is the context there? Tell me, then I can tell you how the research might fit into that scenario. So this is how we go about dealing with this old research.
Yeah, that's a good point, Doris. Thanks so much. Linda, want to wrap us up?
Yeah, sure. I'll just go back to my saw about traceability. The consciousness of whatever I'm doing needs to lead to some kind of actionable item. And the idea too from your last session with co-creation, I think that any effort of research, you can do a written report or some kind of artifact, but the most effective thing is to workshop that as quickly after the research is conducted as possible, and synthesize that and have the outputs of that workshop be actionable items that are then traced back to your point about the historical. So it's like it needs to get traced backwards and forwards, right? And if it's traced right from the origins of it, then that's going to exist. And it also encourages the cultural shift from research being a box that you check and then you move on and just do whatever you're going to do, to it being synthesized and integrated into the whole process, not only as a stream of artifacts, but as an integration of thought processes and thinking about what you've learned and what you're going to do about what you've learned within the whole team that's building the product or feature.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, all. I think I'm going to call it a night. I think I'm going to make you all call it a night or a morning or an afternoon, wherever you are. I'm just being like time zone, not fair. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciated it. And we'll see you at World Usability in November. Yeah. All right. See you later. Have a good day. Bye.